My friend group voted me out of our annual trip group chat and called it a joke. What none of them realized is that I'd been quietly covering nearly half the cost of every single trip we'd taken together for 4 years. My name is Nora. I need to explain how this worked before I explain how it ended, because the financial part of this story is honestly the most important piece. There were 6 of us in the friend group. Me, Beth, Corinne, Tasha, and 2 more, Priyanka and Sam. Close since college, the kind of friends who plan a trip every year without fail. We'd met freshman year in the same dorm hallway, 6 girls who somehow never drifted apart the way most college friend groups do, and by the time we were all in our late 20s, the annual trip had become the thing that proved it, the 1 week a year that confirmed we were all still each other's people. Somewhere around year 2 of this tradition, I noticed something. 2 people in the group, Beth and Corinne, always seemed to be short on money when it came time to split costs. Flights, the shared house, group dinners. It became a pattern where the rest of us would quietly cover the gap so nobody felt awkward. And over time, without ever formally deciding to, I ended up absorbing most of that gap myself, because I was in the best financial position and genuinely didn't mind helping friends I loved. I remember the exact trip where the pattern really set in. Year 2, a beach house on the coast, and Corinne pulled me aside the morning we were supposed to settle up. "I'm so embarrassed," she said, practically whispering, even though we were alone in the kitchen. "I'm like 400 short and payday isn't until Friday. Please don't say anything to the group. I'll Venmo you the second it hits." I told her not to worry about it, covered the gap myself without a second thought, and she never did send that Venmo. Neither of us ever brought it up again. That became the template, repeated in a dozen small variations for the next 3 years. Beth's version of the same pattern looked a little different, less apologetic, more assumed. Year 3, splitting a dinner bill at a group meal, she'd hand me her card and say breezily, "Can you just spot me for now and I'll get you back?" And then simply never bring it up again. Not once, not out of malice exactly, more like she'd genuinely forgotten it was a debt at all, rather than a favor. I stopped keeping a running tally with either of them somewhere around year 3, not because the amounts got smaller, but because tracking it felt like accusing them of something neither of us had ever said out loud. I never made it a big deal. I never brought it up at dinners or mentioned it in the group chat. I just quietly pay a larger share of the shared house, or cover an extra night's stay, or pick up the group dinner bill, since I got a bonus this year. A line that became a running joke nobody questioned because it happened often enough to seem normal. Tasha, one of the other 2 women in the group, actually teased me about it once, at dinner during year 3. "Nora and her mysterious bonuses," she'd said, raising her glass, and everyone laughed, including me, because it was easier than explaining what was actually happening. Over 4 years, I estimated later, doing the math properly for the first time, that I had personally covered somewhere around $11,000 more than my equal share across our trips combined. I never tracked it precisely at the time because I wasn't doing it for credit. I was doing it because I loved these women and wanted everyone to be able to come. This year, planning began for our 5th annual trip. I'd been dealing with a difficult few months, a breakup, a stressful work project, and I'd been quieter in the group chat than usual, slower to respond, occasionally missing plans I'd normally have jumped on immediately. I noticed the group chat had gone strangely quiet around me too, but I told myself everyone was just as busy as I was. I remember one dinner in particular, maybe 3 weeks before I found out, where the conversation kept circling around logistics I didn't recognize, flight prices for dates that sounded oddly specific. When I asked what they were talking about, Beth waved it off. "Oh, nothing. Just some early brainstorming. Nothing solid yet." Corinne wouldn't quite meet my eyes when she said it. I remember thinking faintly that something felt off, and then talking myself out of the thought before it could finish forming, the way you do when the alternative is too uncomfortable to sit with. I found out I'd been cut out of the trip entirely when a mutual friend, not even part of the core group, mentioned casually over coffee that she'd seen Corinne's story that morning, a countdown graphic that said, 1 week until our trip, with all 5 of their names tagged underneath it. "Oh, are you not going this year?" she asked. "I just figured you'd be there. You always are." I remember the exact feeling of my stomach dropping, that specific cold drop of realizing you're the only person in a room who doesn't know something everyone else already does. I went back into our old group chat, the one that had existed for years before the newer planning-specific one was created, and typed, deleted, and retyped a message 3 times before finally sending, "Hey, just saw Corinne's countdown story for the trip next week. I didn't realize there was a new planning chat. What happened?" Beth responded first, breezy, almost dismissive, the little typing bubble appearing and disappearing twice before her actual message came through. "OMG, don't spiral, lol. It wasn't some big thing. We just made a new chat because, honestly, you'd been kind of a downer lately, and someone joked you probably needed a trip off this year to get your energy back. Nobody meant anything serious by it." I sat with that message for a long time, phone in my lap, the cursor blinking in an empty reply box. 4 years of quietly funding a group of women who had, in a moment of minor inconvenience during a hard season of my life, decided the easiest solution was to plan a trip behind my back and laugh about it as a joke. I didn't respond in the old chat right away. Instead, I called Tasha, the one person in the group I trusted enough to actually be honest with. "I need to tell you something," I said, "but first I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it. You knew I wasn't in the new planning chat. Why didn't anyone say anything to me about it?" There was a long pause. "I know," Tasha said, and there was no attempt to dodge it in her voice. "I was in the room when the joke got made. I laughed along with it, actually, which is worse than staying quiet. I told myself it was harmless, that you'd laugh too if you saw it, and some part of me knew, even while I was telling myself that it wasn't true. I should have said something. I should have at least texted you myself instead of letting the group decide for you." "You could have," I said. "At any point in the last 4 months, honestly." "I know," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. That's on me too, not just Beth and Corinne." I told her everything then. Not just about the trip chat, but about 4 years of covering gaps, the beach house, the running joke about bonuses that was never actually true. Tasha went quiet on the other end for a long moment. "Wait," she said finally. "You've been covering their share this whole time? I thought Beth and Corinne were just bad at Venmo. I had no idea it was actually you eating the difference." "They knew each time they asked," I said. "Corinne asked me directly that first beach house trip. Beth just handed me her card and never followed up." What I don't think either of them ever did was add 4 years of it into one number the way I just did this weekend. It's a lot easier to forget a single favor than 4 years of them stacked together. That's still not really generosity, Nora, if you're the only one ever holding the total. That's just you quietly going broke so nobody else has to have an awkward conversation. She paused. "You should actually do the math, like real numbers, not a feeling. Numbers." So I did. I pulled up my bank statements and my old payment app history, going back 4 years, and built an actual spreadsheet, trip by trip, dollar by dollar, documenting exactly what each of us had paid versus what an equal split should have looked like. It took me most of a weekend, and by the end of it, my hands were shaking slightly in a way that surprised me, the same way finding hard proof always seems to hit harder than the vague feeling that came before it. The numbers were worse than I remembered. Beth alone had underpaid by roughly $4,000 across 4 trips. Corinne close behind at just over $3,000. Tasha, Priyanka, and Sam had all paid close to their fair share the whole time, which mattered because it meant this wasn't really a story about 6 equal friends splitting things unevenly by accident. It was a story about 2 people who had been quietly living off the generosity of a friend they'd just decided to cut out for being a downer. The trip left as scheduled, exactly 1 week after Corinne's countdown story, the same week I'd spent building the spreadsheet. By the 3rd day of their trip, 5 of them were settled into a rental house I'd helped fund the last 4 summers running, flights already used, the non-refundable house already checked into. There was nothing left to sabotage even if I'd wanted to. I simply stopped what I'd been doing quietly for 4 years and decided I wasn't going to stay quiet about why. While they were still on that trip, I posted the spreadsheet. Not publicly, not to embarrass anyone in front of strangers, but directly into the old group chat, the one that still had all 6 of us in it, including the 2 I'd have to call the primary beneficiaries of my generosity. I wrote out the message carefully, reading it back twice before sending. Attaching a full breakdown of what everyone's actually paid across our last 4 trips versus an equal split. I've been covering roughly $11,000 more than my share since our first trip together, most of it absorbed by Beth and Corinne specifically. I didn't say anything for 4 years because I didn't think it needed saying. I was wrong. I'm done quietly subsidizing a group that just decided, without asking, that I was too much of a downer to bother including. Figure out the math from here on your own. The response was immediate, and it was not what any of them expected. Corinne called me within 20 minutes, her voice already thick with crying before I even said hello. "Nora, I am so sorry. I knew I was asking you for help, that first summer and probably a few times after. I just never let myself add it up, never let myself really think about how many times it happened or what it turned into over 4 years. It was easier to just not look at it directly." She was talking fast, tripping over her own words. "I feel sick. I feel actually sick right now." "You knew each time," I said. "That's the part I need you to actually sit with, not the total. You knew every single time you asked. You just never had to think about what it added up to, because I made sure you never had to." Beth's response took longer. First, a single defensive line, the kind of anger that only shows up when someone knows they're caught. This feels like a weird thing to do while we're literally on vacation. Not an apology, not even a denial, just irritation that the timing was inconvenient for her. Then silence, for almost a full day. Then 2 nights later, a much longer message, one I could tell she'd actually taken time over. "I've been thinking about this nonstop since you sent it. You're right, and I'm ashamed, and it's not really about the money, even though the money is real and I clearly took advantage of it without ever really looking at it directly. It's that we made a joke out of excluding you during what was obviously a hard season for you, and that was cruel regardless of anything else. I'm sorry, Nora. Really." I didn't answer either message right away. An apology that only shows up after you've been caught with a spreadsheet isn't nothing, but it isn't the same as someone who simply chose, on their own, to treat you decently in the first place. Priyanka, who almost never weighed in on group drama, wrote a message that landed harder than anyone expected. "I don't have a good excuse. I was in the new chat too. I didn't ask why you weren't in it. I just didn't think about it, which honestly might be worse than the joke itself. I'm embarrassed for all of us, myself included." Sam, usually the peacemaker, didn't try to smooth it over this time either. "Same. I let this become normal because it was easier than asking questions. That's on me too, Nora, not just Beth and Corinne." A conversation that should have happened years earlier finally happened, 4 years too late, in a group chat while I sat at home, uninvited from a trip I had quietly funded a third of. I'm still friends with Tasha, Priyanka, and Sam. That part wasn't complicated to figure out. They owned their part in it, even the smaller part, without me having to ask twice. Beth and Corinne are a different story. I haven't ruled out ever speaking to them again, but I also haven't gone on a single trip with either of them since. And when the 6 of us do get together now, it's smaller gatherings, dinners, nothing that requires me to trust anyone with my bank account or my sense of who actually has my back when things get hard. An apology doesn't automatically buy back 4 years of being quietly used and then discarded the one time I needed something back. I'm still deciding how much of that trust is actually rebuildable, and I'm in no hurry to decide. I think about that original message a lot, the one calling me a downer who needed a trip off. I think about how easy it would have been for any of them to simply ask if I was okay, rather than deciding quietly among themselves that the solution was to plan around me. Generosity, I've learned, can quietly become an expectation if you never say anything about it. I stopped saying nothing. That was the whole revenge, really, just finally speaking the numbers out loud. Tell me, would you have shown the spreadsheet while they were still on the trip, or waited until they got back? If you believe quiet generosity deserves better than quiet exploitation, hit subscribe. We've got another story soon about a group chat that went even further than this one.